I'm here with Christian Haja, one of the brilliant minds involved in the running of Seal mobile games. An extremely successful mobile developer in northern Germany, Seal have come up with a number of fascinating ways to replicate their success on mobile, spending little money on marketing in comparison to most established mobile game developers and having a small team. They currently have 5 games live right now and have 250,000 monthly active players. Seal Mobile is a great example of how to use outstanding thinking and innovation to create a successful brand in a notoriously boom and bust marketplace. Christian, welcome. Great to have you here. Let's dive straight in. You have a fascinating story at Seal Mobile Games, partly because of the way you've developed your studio through innovative thinking and doing. Can you tell us a little bit about how you started and what led you to creating game categories like your Bloodline Management and Strategy series?
To put it sort of in a nutshell, because there's a lot of story to cover because our company was founded back in 2005. So we're sort of a dinosaur in the mobile space. But from where we come, back then, around 2005, our CEOs actually intended to just do something within the digital space. And we also had partner matchmaking, software, etc. But in 2005, we finally had a sort of chance of luck. Both our CEOs back then knew Heiko Huberts, the founder of BigPoint, and together they developed our first free-to-play mobile strategy game, or free-to-play strategy game, because back then we had web-based games, browser games. But this sort of was the moment where free-to-play strategy games were the definition of what became our success story. And from then on, we stayed with this free-to-play strategy genre and expanded to further platforms. So at some point Facebook, and in 2015 we finally transitioned into a mobile games company, but we always kept in mind to cover all platforms possible, just to have, or just to cater to all possible audiences that are out there. So that's sort of the short story.
Thank you. Yeah, great. And can you tell us a little bit about what you're working on at the moment?
Yeah, so right now we're working actually on 3 things. So we've got a framework-driven approach, meaning our games are all based on the same framework. They share the same game mechanics. And the current framework is outdated, and we do one thing. So we have this portfolio of sort of outdated titles that we still maintain with live ops, and we still produce features for our players. On the other hand, we're developing a brand new framework just to have the newest technology and to rethink all the game design, all the game mechanics that we currently have. And this new framework will then act as production platform for the next titles. I think the next 3 to 5 years should cover it. And besides that, we're also currently working on on the Baltic Dev Days, which will be a conference, or more like a festival gathering of game developers and indie game developers, and this will be here in Kiel. So mainly 3 things.
Great. Yeah, that's really interesting, actually. When you talk about this framework, can you dive in a little bit more into that? Perhaps tell us about the mechanics and the back-end system and the processes that you have for bringing the games to market.
Okay. So I think from a technical perspective, there's not so much to say. So we have a PHP and MySQL running on a Node.js server. And PHP MySQL has all the database and game mechanics, and sort of is the backend. The interesting thing about the approach that we have come up with, this framework-driven approach, sort of has 2 ideas: to produce games as efficient as possible, because we're in a competitive space. and having efficient processes helps you to actually be competitive. So this framework is used to produce multiple titles that all share the same game mechanics. So, for example, Bloody Roads California, which is our flagship title, is a classic base building and strategy game where players may battle each other. So we have a combat system, we have a clan system, achievements, rankings, chat system. So you name it, we most likely have it. And based on these core game mechanics, we also have additional titles. You said 5 titles. Interestingly, only 3 of them became commercially successful, but this sort of shows the approach that we have. So it's an iterative approach. We usually dive into Facebook analytics, try to find highly solvent target audiences. If we find them, we try to identify a setting of particular interest to those audiences. If we find one, very well, let's say it's Wild West, and then we produce all the art assets, which takes like 3 to 6 months. And by this framework-driven approach, we can easily squeeze in all the art assets. All the game mechanics are already in place, and we have got a proven business concept or business model. And we can sort of instantly go to full launch. So sometimes there's, of course, a risk, but when I'm talking full launch, we always go full launch with performance-driven marketing.
I mean, that's incredible. So you're actually using the audience in advance to decide what games you're going to make.
Yes. And with the new framework, we will even go a step further in bringing in the audience and a select few of users to test our new game mechanics.
Oh, that's fabulous. Really is unusual and innovative. So do you, your audience itself, do you have different games for different groups? So teenagers, say, or kids market, or football, soccer mums, as they call them in the States?
I'd say yes and no. Mainly no, because our titles are all free-to-play strategy games. So they attract a specific audience, usually male, gender. I think around about 85% of our users are male, but it also always has something to do with the product itself. So our Outlaw Biker themed title, which is like Sons of Anarchy style, very strongly attracts a male audience. But if you take then a look to our Wild West themed game, this one has a slightly more female audience. So it always depends.
Yeah, so but under the framework, I suppose it's completely possible that you could target any audience if you found that solvent audience on Facebook. Obviously, you'd have to write the particular mechanic.
Yes, exactly. So if we play around with this idea, yes, I think we could easily come up with, let's say, a horse management game that caters towards a female audience, 15 to 20, something like that. So this girl management style, making it graphics-wise more appealing to a younger audience. That would be definitely possible, yes.
Wow. I have a question here. It says, how much of an impact would you say that this had on the success of your studio? But it sounds like the studio is built around the framework.
Yes, you can say that. And I think the answer to that is crucial. If we haven't rethought the way how we work, if we hadn't streamlined all those processes, we would have been gone since 2014 maybe. Because 2014 was one of those years that was really, 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 really tough for us. We had to let go some of our employees. I, for example, also left the company, and on a skeleton crew, we worked on this first mobile framework. And at the point when we finished the production or the development of this framework, our CEOs brought back all the people, those that still were available. But we are a company that is a very strong family-driven culture, sort of. Yes, and this framework-driven approach with all the iterative processes and agile mindset is very strong, embedded within our culture, company culture.
Yeah, I mean, that's incredible. I mean, that level of commitment is a real powerful example to young indies and people starting out, because you do have, no matter how good you are at deal making, there are years where in a hit driven business you just don't have any hits, or you know, something goes wrong, you don't get enough deals, and it's very hard to keep a sustained studio going. Yes. At one point we had 140 people altogether, and it was costing over £250,000 a month just to keep the doors open. So I completely understand.
And it's important to keep that in mind. I mean, you can always bring in more people, but doubling the number of employees does not mean that you double the productivity of your company. That's also one of the reasons why we as a studio intend to still have a family spirit driven company, sort of, with maybe in the future 20 to 50 people, but even 50 is a number of employees that you still have to manage and maintain all the processes is quite a difficult or challenging task.
Yeah, it's very difficult to keep that family feeling when the family is so large.
Exactly.
So you mentioned briefly, you know, squeezing in all of the art, you know, for a release. But how do you manage the virtual assets across your individual series when they may have different themes? How have you made efficiencies there?
That's maybe one of the parts where we still have a lot of room for improvement. Because right now we have a folder for every single product. Then we create the art assets, and then we simply swap them out and build a new title. But of course, we have a repository, and we've got a subversion system, so that everything is sort of structured. And but I don't know where to start here. I think the thing to explain here is that by this nature of this framework-driven approach, all titles share the same game mechanics. So it is easy to bring this combat system from a Outlaw Biker theme to a Wild West theme. Both are ranged combat. We have all the game mechanics, and we usually have this nemesis-driven combat where a certain unit is good at fighting another unit. Other efficiencies are all the buildings are usually similar, or maybe even the same. They just have other names. For example, we have one building that covers the overall productivity within your base. In our latest game, Vikings at War, this one is I think the Ting place, where it's like a gathering place, and you have faith as level for productivity within your base. And if you take a look to the Outlaw Biker game, there we have, there you simply bribe the cops, because cops disturb your business, your dirty business, and so you simply bribe them, and if you cover 100%, you're safe.
Yes,
yeah, that's mainly it about the efficiencies.
Yeah, thank you. And you have a pretty impressive process for testing new ideas. And you've managed to incorporate a few tech processes like design thinking. How do you bring a new game to market at Seal Mobile?
I think it's important to say here that we usually do not think game, we think framework, because all our efforts go into a framework that we then use to produce a multitude of games that all share the same game mechanics. So that we're able to produce in a very streamlined and efficient way, typical German thing, sort of. And when it comes to designing a feature set for our titles, then we actually apply design thinking, which is a method from, I think, Hasso-Plattner Institute, but it's actually a fairly old thing that always pops up sometimes and is advertised by innovative thinkers. The way how we utilize design thinking is we sort of mixed it with a little bit lean production, so Eric Rice lean thinking methods, and also an entrepreneurial mindset. Entrepreneurial mindset, know when things get expensive. So, for example, if you have or work on an idea, the longer it takes to actually validate the idea and then to skip this idea, the more expensive it becomes. So all our efforts go towards quickly coming up with ideas, validating those ideas, and if necessary, simply kill those ideas if they do not work. The way how we do this is, or in a nutshell, the process is usually have a task, a clear task, for example, develop a character-driven combat system or something like that. And then we have a group of 3 people. The reason for 3 people at maximum is very easy. The more people you have, the more buzz is created. If you have, I think, 13 people, it's like 70 plus communication paths, and all people are talking and you never come to an end. So we have a clear number of people, 3, and then there's always a moderator who's interfering if people do not focus on the task that is at hand. And those people come from different specialization fields. So it could be me as business development manager, it could be a programmer, it could be an artist. The reason for that is fairly simple, because all of us have different expertises depending on the specialization field, or also from gaming. I mean, I love MMORPGs. Our programs love strategy games. And so we always cover a wide horizon of different expertises and experiences. And then it's fairly simple. We start brainstorming and we have clear time constraints. So brainstorming is, I think we have 5 to 10 minutes for brainstorming, depending on the task. For example, develop a character-driven combat system, 5 to 10 minutes, come up with ideas. It's in a very traditional mode. We just put it on sheets, and in the next phase, we simply cluster those ideas using a know-how-wow matrix. This know-how-wow matrix is used to identify if it's technically possible to realize this idea, and also to identify if it makes sense to develop this idea from a perspective of our users and from the perspective of our business. So, and if we, interestingly, fairly quickly, a sweet spot sort of forms, and this sweet spot is then used to create a storyboard. And this storyboard is then used to pitch in front of the whole company. And there is no discussion allowed. With this pitch, we take the whole feedback, and within the next step, the feedback is embedded in this storyboard, and we create a new storyboard. And then we pitch again, rinse and repeat until we are satisfied with the output.
Is that written feedback or verbal feedback?
Verbal feedback. So it's like an elevator pitch, sort of, here in our studio, and everyone is sitting around the whole table. And then we simply gather the feedback. And when we're done with that step, we validate this idea with our users. Maybe what is important also to know is this idea finding phase only takes like not more than a day, usually half a day. And then we have the first idea pitched, and we have the feedback, then we restructure it, and then we pitch it to a select few of users. Sometimes our users say, are you totally nuts? That does not make sense at all. Then rinse and repeat, next iteration. When our users are satisfied with our games, sometimes they also add interesting additional ideas. And when we're done with that prototyping stage, and the prototypes will then be validated on certain secondary markets. For example, in Indonesia, where we test only a specific feature. And if we have a validation here, it goes back to the project management, where our project manager prepares it for the whole production workflow.
I don't know, how large is the user group testing?
The user group usually consists of, I would say, 5 to 10 people, not more. But also here, I have to be honest about that. We clearly focus on users that become active players and also that become paying players, because in those strategy games segment, only a small number of players usually converts to paying user, and so for us as a business, it's really important.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I mean, that's fascinating. I really appreciate you going into such depth there. I'm sure our users will appreciate that. Such a quick and cost-effective way to test out new ideas. So that process normally takes about a day, you know, give and take. But how is the rest of your studio structured? Do you have a traditional team set up where programmers and artists are working a lot side by side?
Yes, not in the traditional sense that you experience with AAA studios, because we simply do not have the resources to have, let's say, a huge game design team. That's also one of the reasons why we came up with this design thinking approach for game design. So our production team, well, we've got one technical director who covers all the project management and all the planning. And the production team consists of 2 backend programmers, 2 Unity developers, and we have 3 artists. And we have not such a strong specialization. It's more like generalists with a slight specialization.
Yeah, thank you. So perhaps we could talk about marketing. Mm-hmm. When it comes to marketing, the mobile games marketplace is notoriously difficult and expensive to crack. Yet you've found a way to do so without breaking the bank. What do you recommend to game developers doing marketing on mobile?
The Deming cycle is what I would recommend. The Deming cycle is fairly known in economics. It's plan, do, check, act. So first, think about the product that you have. A strategy game, well, let's just talk about casual games, for example. A casual game, you can advertise it on many different platforms, and it's easy to get lost in this jungle of platforms. So I think it makes sense to first focus on your product, identify your target audience, and the next step, identify the platforms where you may find your target audience, and then focus on the platform first. Because as you mentioned, it can become quite expensive to run user acquisition. And so I usually recommend to exactly this approach. My first bet without advertising any platform is take a closer look to Facebook. They have good documentation. They have a lot of users. I mean, it's like 1.5 billion users right now, or even more. So it's a good starting point, and from there you can then expand to further platforms if needed. So a clear, structured approach. Think about your audience. Think about the platform, and then plan, do, check, act. Also your campaigns. You also have always to keep in mind which art assets you use for advertising your games, and also sometimes think outside the box. You do not always need to just start advertising with user acquisition on those platforms. You could also approach organizers of events and conferences. I often see on different conferences a lot of high quality indie titles, and this is also a good chance to gain exposure.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, that's great. I mean, you've managed to cultivate very good relationships with the platform holders and developers. How have you done that?
Luckily, I've got the privilege of being a business development manager that is allowed to travel around the world. I think at some point it is inevitable to have a person that is dedicated in building up those relationships. Um, because at some point, if you've got a product that is doing well from a business perspective, you simply have a win-win situation, because the platform holders like Google Play, Apple, they are also interested in good business. So, and if you communicate that you have a good product, then you will receive the information how you can actually promote those titles further on those platforms. And besides that, I always say honesty, respect, and integrity. So, and of course, communication. If you don't communicate, you can forget all the rest. Yes, but on the other hand, honesty. Be clear about all the ideas, about the vision that you have for your title, and if you intend to kill a certain product, a game, because you want to skip your focus or want to focus on another product, then do so, because this also helps your partner to align his resources to other projects or other products. Yeah, that's mainly it. Communication and a steady communication.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I mean, once again, that's really useful for our audience here. You said that the biggest mistake you can make with marketing is to do it without thinking. But I think we've covered that really in the structured approach that you talked about. Is there anything else you'd like to say about that?
Maybe be bold. And sometimes chances show up that might not look like sort of this shiny golden thing that you are always looking for, but maybe as a good example of a failed opportunity. Back in, I think, 2008, we were approached by business partners, and they were saying, take a look at the Facebook platform. And we were thinking, come on, that's a social platform. What does it have to do with games? It turned out to become one of the largest games platforms for several years, until mobile then was on the rise. So be open for opportunities. Of course, think, but always be on the lookout and try to adapt, try to rethink the way how you work, and you will be good to go.
Yeah, fantastic. What a great piece of advice. Thank you very much. And so with Seal Mobile Games, what are the future plans for Seal Mobile? What do the next few years hold for you guys?
The next few years, as mentioned, due to this framework-driven approach, I see us at least for the next 3 years developing new titles with a new framework that will be ready for production next year, around summer. And of course, we're always sort of trying to, but I think this is exactly the same for every studio out there. We all are looking for the next big thing, sort of the big hit. Hopefully, we will do so too. But as mentioned also before, I think we will even then try to stay small. Don't grow in this exponential way that we often see, because often there's also a downfall. And hopefully I will then still have the privilege to act as business development manager and talking to wonderful people like you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, it's great. I mean, I've just out of my own personal curiosity, and it might be a huge change of direction or big bite, too big a bite to take. But your framework, is it flexible that you could perhaps get onto console or onto PC as well, or is it purely mobile, your focus?
I would say it is possible, because we use the Unity engine as sort of backbone, and the framework is set on top. And with Unity, you're able to also deliver a version to console. But again, it always comes down to the product. So a base building and strategy game is not as interesting maybe to console players because they have more like this action-oriented need. But in general, yes, it would be possible. And right now we already cover multiple platforms, iOS, Android, so the mobile sphere. We also have a WebGL version, Facebook Canvas, and we even have Mac OS X and PC versions. So our players may play our titles when they're commuting back home, and when they're back home, they can just start their computer and then play on the PC.
Yeah, great, thank you. And so your plans are really still to remain always focused in the strategy arena?
For the moment, yes, because that's what we're good in doing. But the titles produced with a new framework, this will be sort of the point where we start blending different genres. So the next framework will utilize the strategy core gameplay that we already have with all the space management and combat, but we will, well, we already redesigned the whole combat, how it takes place. We will move from a unit-based combat system to a character-driven combat system, where you have characters that you can equip with different items. You can equip skills. You will be able to simply well, upgrade them. So that's sort of maybe also an industry thing right now, to bringing in more RPG elements, but we also intend to bring in 4X strategy elements. So research trees, etc., to have this sort of a more interesting games experience where you do not only have this gaming circling around base building and fighting. We want more interaction possibilities for our users, and especially interaction possibilities that they actually want to have.
Wow, that's fabulous. I'm looking forward to what's your next release that we should keep an eye out for?
The next release will be in 2019 summer. So the last title, Vikings at War, was the final chapter of our current framework. That framework is called the Bloodline, or internally the Bloodline framework. So a lot of the titles have names that go Bloody Roads, California, Bloody West, Infamous Legends, etc. And Vikings at War was a clear seizure, so we also renamed this game. And we played around with the user interface, also with different camera angles for the setting, and sort of try to get out the maximum out of this framework that is possible. But there's a clear technical limitation. So, for example, when our games are featured on Google Play, it's tough, and our backend programmers usually are not that happy about featuring, because they put a lot of stress on the backend. And that's also a reason for this new framework. We will bring in cloud-based solutions so that we have scalability.
Oh, that's great. Wow, it sounds, from a technical perspective, it's absolutely fascinating to me. Mm-hmm. I have two final questions, if I may.
Sure, you're welcome.
Firstly, do you have any advice for indie studios who are starting out or expanding? Any advice or any things to avoid?
Any things to avoid? Yes. So I'm a good example for how to avoid marketing costs that do not make sense. I spent some money on a certain platform and it turned out to be a huge failure. So focus on your product, think about the audience, think about where to find this audience, and then simply focus on this platform where you find this audience when you want to advertise your game. This is, I think, crucial for success, especially in the very beginning as an indie.
And what's the time frame for that? How in advance do you need to start to find your players, would you say?
I wouldn't just say to find your players, but actually to communicate, start communicating. And I think it's at the very beginning when you have the idea of a game. because the earlier you talk to people, you don't have to go public, whole public. I mean, choose a select few of people that you trust, bring them in, get their idea, get their opinion, and then with time expand the circle of people you're talking to. And at some point, I mean, also while you're developing a game, get in touch with people, try to define your audience by talking very early while developing your game. This Creative Haja, it generates a lot of learnings that you can use then.
Oh, thank you. That's fabulous. Any other things new or expanding indies should avoid, or anything that you definitely recommend they should do?
Oh my God. I think I sort of covered the majority so far.
Okay. I have one more. Sorry, did I interrupt you?
No.
Okay. I have one more. If you had your time over again, is there anything that you'd do differently?
Personally, I would have joined the games industry a lot earlier, because I started as studying dentistry, and then at some point I figured out, okay, games is what I want to do. And then moving from dentistry to games, it took some time.
Yeah, well done for doing that. And yeah, I mean, I was, I understand that completely. I was doing interactive CD-ROM, you know, like the history of punk on CD-ROM, Philips CDI. And I was doing Bob Marley and some Second World War stuff for HarperCollins on CD. Okay. And we were getting, you know, £50,000 to £100,000 per contract, which was great. But the guys up the road who were working on PlayStation 1 were getting millions in royalties. So
yeah, millions in royalties. I mean, there's always this big vision, this big game that you're looking at, but you don't always have to have this very, very big game. I mean, we are a prime example for a company that manages to do, or we do not only survive, we have a profitable business, yet we are not Supercell or King or Zynga or all these other companies that are fairly huge. To me, success is when you can make a living out of games. Done. Then you're successful. And of course, when you're happy with what you're doing.
I mean, that's a fabulous grounding piece of advice and wisdom to end. Christian, it's been an absolute pleasure for me. I really appreciate the fascinating insight you've given us today.
The pleasure is mine.
I'm going to relook at my own marketing based on what you've talked about. So thank you.
Should you be interested, I will be happy to connect you to our marketing god, Timo, who's doing performance-based marketing since day one at our company.
Oh, that's really kind of you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And how's the best if our audience would like to get in touch with you guys? What's the best way to do that, please?
To get in touch with us, so at our website, we've got this info@sealmedia.de. Besides that, everyone is welcome to get in touch with me via LinkedIn. That's actually the most convenient way to get me, and where I'm responsive fairly quickly.
Great. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.